Daniel sat at a small corner table, his phone balanced against his ear while his other hand guided his daughter through her math homework. The café was alive with chatter, clinking cups, and the smell of roasted coffee beans, but his mind was split between deadlines and being the father his little girl needed. He tried to smile at her questions, though the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. In the middle of that noise, something unusual caught his attention. Across the room, a young woman sat with a man who seemed far too close, far too insistent. At first, Daniel thought nothing of it. People had arguments in cafes all the time. But then he noticed the way her fingers drummed against her cup, slow and deliberate, like a silent pattern. Her shoulders were stiff, her body angled slightly away from him, and her eyes kept darting around, never settling, as if searching for a way out. It wasn't nervous fidgeting, it was something more. A quiet plea wrapped in movements so small most people would overlook them. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He had read about signals like this once, tiny, coded actions that meant, "I need help," when words couldn't be spoken. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if he was imagining it. But then he saw her grip tighten on the edge of the table, her gaze flicking briefly toward him, almost desperate. The message was clear. She needed someone to notice. And somehow, fate had chosen him. Daniel's pulse quickened as he studied the scene more carefully. The man beside the young woman leaned in too close, speaking in a low, forceful tone. She barely nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she brought the cup to her lips. The rhythm of her fingers tapping against the ceramic was steady, intentional. She wasn't just restless, she was signaling. Daniel swallowed hard. He remembered reading about distress gestures, subtle signals people used when they couldn't speak openly. His chest tightened as realization sank in. This wasn't coincidence. She was afraid, and she was reaching out the only way she could. The café bustled on as if nothing was wrong. Laughter spilled from one table, the barista called out orders, someone tapped on a laptop. Yet in the middle of it all, this silent cry for help seemed to echo louder than the noise around him. His daughter tugged on his sleeve, whispering a question about her homework, but Daniel barely heard. His eyes stayed locked on the young woman, and he noticed how carefully she avoided looking at the man beside her. Her gaze flickered toward the door, then back down to her cup, as though escape was on her mind but impossible. Daniel's breath grew shallow. Every instinct in him said to stay out of it, to mind his own business. But another voice, quieter and stronger, told him that doing nothing would mean leaving her trapped. He knew, without doubt, that this was a moment he couldn't ignore. Daniel pushed his chair back slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. He glanced at his daughter, who watched him with curious eyes, sensing his unease. Taking a deep breath, he rose to his feet. Every step toward the young woman felt heavier, but he knew hesitation could cost her the chance she so desperately needed. As he reached the table, he forced a warm, familiar smile onto his face. "Hey, Emily," he said brightly, as if greeting an old friend. "Sorry I'm late. Ready to head out?" For a split second, silence hung in the air. The young woman's eyes widened, then softened with recognition of what he was doing. Relief washed over her features like a breaking wave. She nodded quickly, clutching her bag as though it were a lifeline. The man beside her scowled, his body tensing. "Do you know this guy?" he demanded, suspicion sharp in his voice. Daniel didn't flinch. He kept his gaze steady, calm but firm. "Of course she does," he said smoothly, placing a protective hand on the back of her chair. "We've been meaning to catch up all week." The woman stood, her movements shaky but determined. She slipped to Daniel's side without hesitation, leaning slightly toward him as if she had finally found shelter. His daughter watched from their table, her wide eyes filled with a mix of confusion and awe. Daniel's pulse raced, but inside, a quiet resolve settled. He had made his choice, he would not back down. The man started to rise, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, but Daniel shifted just enough to block his path. There was no aggression in his stance, only a steady, unshakable presence that spoke louder than words. The café had grown quieter, a few heads turning toward the tense moment, and the man seemed to think twice. With a muttered curse under his breath, he sank back into his seat, glaring but not daring to push further. Daniel gently guided the young woman toward the door, his hand resting reassuringly near her shoulder without crowding her. His daughter hurried to his other side, clutching her backpack and looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. As they stepped out into the open air, the woman released a shaky breath she had been holding for far too long. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I didn't think anyone would notice. I didn't know how to get away." Her voice cracked under the weight of relief. Daniel offered her a small, steady nod. "You don't have to explain. You're safe now." The woman pressed her hands together, trembling but grateful, her gaze flicking briefly to his daughter. "Thank you, for stepping in when no one else did." His little girl squeezed his hand tightly, her young face glowing with quiet admiration. For her, the lesson was unspoken but powerful. She had just seen what it meant to be brave in the simplest, most human way. As they walked away from the café, the evening air felt lighter, calmer, as though the world itself had exhaled with them. The young woman paused at the corner, turning to face Daniel. Her voice was steadier now, though her eyes still shimmered. "You'll never know what this meant to me," she said softly. "I thought I was alone." Daniel gave a reassuring smile. "You weren't. Sometimes all it takes is someone paying attention." With a final grateful nod, she disappeared into the flow of the city, free at last. Daniel stood for a moment, watching her go, before looking down at his daughter. She hadn't said much, but her expression spoke volumes, her eyes filled with admiration, her small hand wrapped tightly around his. He realized she had just witnessed something he could never teach with words, the importance of standing up when someone is in need. As they headed home, Daniel's thoughts stirred. He often worried that he wasn't enough. That the long hours, the exhaustion, the constant juggling of roles might make him fall short as a father. But tonight, in one small act of courage, he had shown his daughter the kind of strength that truly mattered. She looked up at him and whispered, "Daddy, you're my hero." The words sank deep into his heart, dissolving every doubt. In that moment, Daniel understood, being a good father wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing compassion, even to strangers, and teaching his child that kindness could change the world.